Welcome, Victoria.
Why, thank you, Kimberly.
It's a treat to have you back on the show. I think this might be round
Oh,
3,
is it really? But we've known each other a long time.
maybe 4. Yes, yes. I think it goes back to, my goodness, I think that in factory farming conference. Is that right?
Oh, yeah. What was that?
10?
2004 something.
I know.
Long time ago.
It's been a while.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Well, and I have admired you for all that time. I just want your listeners to know what a fan I am. And if reincarnation is true, I want to come back as Kimberly Wilson because your style is absolutely enchanting, but underneath your style is this incredible foundation of substance. And that's such a rare and beautiful combination. I just admire you to the moon and back.
Thank you, Victoria. Well, the feeling's mutual, and it really is a delight to have you back on the show. And I'm so excited about your new book. Do you want to tell
Oh, me
listeners a
too.
little bit? Aging Like a Yogi. Perfect. Perfect.
Yeah, Edge Like a Yogi, a heavenly path to a dazzling third act, but it's really for anybody over 50. When I say third act, it's because that's where I am. We were just talking that I am about to be 74 and a half. And it's like, oh my gosh, how did that happen? And yet, I think because I have been doing some of these things, like I discovered yoga when I was 17. That was when you had to discover it. It wasn't at every Y and every health club. It was this kind of odd thing that people confused with yogurt and figured they didn't know which was which, but they're both foreign and they're both weird and you should probably stay away. And so for a long time, I've kind of had percolating in my psyche and trying to keep up with in the regular practice of life, which of course I have done imperfectly, these ideas that I think really do help make life better going forward, both in terms of physical vitality and positive attitude and peace and great expectations instead of depression and fear.
I love that. That ties it all up in a beautiful package. Well, and tell us how this book is different, Victoria, because you've written many books. What, 10, 15 now?
This will be number 14.
14.
And they're kind of all over the place in one way because I come from a generation when writers are supposed to be able to write. I remember looking at the frontispiece of an Aldous Huxley book. He was the guy who wrote Brave New World, but it had listed his fiction, his nonfiction, his history, his memoir, his biography, his poetry, his children books, his health book. And that's how I see it. Now, that's not how the publishing industry sees it. You're supposed to be in your little platform area and never ever leave. But I've written about well-being, I've written about veganism, I've written about aging, I've written about health, and in some books, it's a mixture of a lot of that stuff. I even co-wrote a cookbook, which I'm not sure was a good idea because that's not really how I see myself. But, I've been out there. And so this one really seems to bring a lot of that together because to me, all these things about living well, making a difference in the world, leaving a legacy, they're all related. So the reason that I wanted to write Age Like a Yogi is because I've actually been involved in yoga longer than I've been doing any of the other things for which I have some reputation in the world. So, for example, I wrote a book called Main Street Vegan that did really well and kind of spawned a brand. So I have Main Street Vegan Academy that trains vegan coaches. I've done the Main Street Vegan podcast for, 12 years now. And yet, long before that, years and years before I even went vegan, there was yoga. And yoga was actually what made me vegetarian. And yoga was what brought together spiritual seeking that I had been doing since I was a little kid. I mean, I just came into this life wondering about the big picture. I remember my best friend in 7th grade, Rebecca Gott, had a library of mystical books because her mother was interested in things like that. So we would read The Practice of the Presence of God and The Cloud of Unknowing and all these amazing books of Christian mysticism because her mom had them there. And my Beatles fan club pen pal asked me once what I wanted to be when I grew up. And I said, I want to be a mystic. And she said, well, you should maybe just be a progressive lady theologian because you could study for that in college. But there's always been this kind of seeking. And so as I looked at what my heart was tugging on me to write about next, it was to bring all of this together in a way to move forward in the post 50 decades with the spiritual grounding of yoga and the wonderful health practices of Ayurveda, which I discovered quite a bit later, but which I find are just extremely helpful. And so those have all come together in the 40 little chapters of Age Like a Yogi, and I'm very excited.
I'm so excited for its release. Listeners, I got a little sneak peek of it, and it is amazing. It really is so good.
Well, I appreciate that, Kimberly. And you gave me a wonderful endorsement, which I appreciate a lot. And something I'd just like to share with your listeners, if they have an interest in taking a look on Amazon or Barnes and Noble or wherever you find out about books, is that anybody who pre-orders, meaning that you order before the pub date of January 14th, will be invited to a wonderful January 12th all-day Zoom seminar, and it'll be recorded if you're not available on January 12th. This is an exclusive seminar only for pre-order people, no cost, of course. And in addition, you'll get another bonus, which is the Age Like a Yogi e-cookbook. So if you find yourself pre-ordering the book, then if you just send your receipt to assist@victoriamoran.com, then we will send you the e-cookbook this fall and the invitation to the event in January.
Nice. Very cool. Yeah, I'm so excited for you.
Well, it's always cool to have a book as being an author as well. For me, it's very much like having a baby. I only did that once. Thank goodness it's 14 books, one baby, and not the other way around. But it's this wonderful kind of sense of expectation. And a couple of days ago in the mail, I received the galleys, which look like how the book is going to look, but inside it's uncorrected. So that means it's been edited, but there are still all these typos and things, and we're in the final phase. And I was thinking, well, this is like the sonogram of the book, to stay in the birth analogy. This is like what it's going to look like, but it still needs some growth and some development. So we're there now, and it's exciting. I'm really always, there's something about a new book. It's like, who knows what it's going to do? Maybe this one will change the world. And they all change the world a little bit. So that means that every single one is a success.
Yes, yes. Well, I'm so excited for you. And I'm curious, kind of, you said what was it, third stage? Is that what you said? Third
Mhm.
phase or
Oh,
stage?
a third act. Yeah.
Third act. Okay. Not even
Yes.
stage or phase. So your third act. So as you think about from a midlife perspective, right? It's kind of like the second stage, the second act, the second phase. And so I'm curious for you, is there anything in particular that you learned along the way on this journey, which I can't believe you're almost 75 at some point. That just shocks me.
Me too.
You've you have definitely aged like a yogi. But it's like, are there any things you're like, I wish I had known this. It would have made my life a lot easier in
Oh,
midlife.
yeah. I mean, I think midlife is the biggest shock for modern women because we're doing really well with puberty in young girls. That used to be a big shocker, and a lot of little girls would have their first period, not know what was going on, thinking they were dying. I mean, you hear all these stories. And now we have really stepped up to the plate for young women. Good for us. But for women entering midlife, and it's certainly better than it used to be, but it's just not all the information laid out in a way that people need to hear it and can understand it. So in my case, I had read all of these things like, well, if you live well and if you eat well, then you're not even going to notice it because in Japanese, there isn't even a word for menopause. Well, I'll bet there is now, and there probably was then. But when it happened and I started having these god awful hot flashes, I was embarrassed and ashamed. It's like, what have I been doing wrong? I must be doing something that those Japanese women aren't doing because they don't even have a word for it. Well, maybe they're just suffering in silence. So that was a big shock. There was also for me a huge change in my body. And I joke about this in some of my talks, and I say it was invasion of the body snatchers in my bedroom. We're talking about age 49 and a half, age 50, right around menopause for me. And I went to bed the way I'd always look, nice flat stomach, nice round butt. And I woke up in the morning and that was flipped. And my stomach was round and my butt was flat. And it was like, that's why they call it the change. So I started looking at women about my age, and I'd go to the gym and I'd go premenopausal, premenopausal, post, pre, post, post, pre, post, post, post. There's a whole bunch of us because there is this kind of shift, there's this kind of change, and people react differently. People need to respond in different ways. But the fact that this is a change and that it's a huge change needs to be acknowledged. Now, that's not to say that it's all negative, because you can grab onto this time of life and really get your power. I remember right around 50, it was either my husband or my daughter walked into the kitchen and very innocently said, "What's for dinner?" And I literally had to catch myself before I said, "Fix your own damn dinner." Because there was just something in me that was like, oh, you're kind of done on this elaborate cooking thing. You've done that for quite a while now. And now it's time to move into simplifying that area and maybe complicating something else. So I think when we're left to really pick up the reins at this time of life, there's nothing that we can't do. And what I did at 50 was move to New York City from Kansas City, Missouri. So my daughter was ready to come to New York. She was a child actor. She announced, "I have done all the theater that I can do in Kansas City. I need to go to New York." And I knew she did. And I'd been writing books for years, and I felt that I needed to be where they published the books. So we came. And I'm glad. I think that there's a certain power in youth. There's so many distractions because everything is new. You just wake up every day and there's new ideas and new things. And here you find something else. And here all of a sudden you've got this beautiful body that you could just spend hours making up every day. And then along comes sex, and that's very enticing. And then everything is just new. And it's like all these roads. And here comes a cool road. So let's take that one. And that's fine because you learn things, but maybe the road that's really your life path is somewhere else. And so I think in midlife, we start to really see that the brightest lights are on our true life path road.
Mm. I love that. I didn't realize you moved to New York when you were 50. That's amazing. Well, what a
Yeah.
shift from Kansas City.
Well, people say that, but I think cities are cities. Any place with professional sports teams and tall buildings, that's a city. Now, New York, of course, is this other thing. And I have loved it for 24 years. And if I ever leave, it will be because of the noise. It's just so noisy. The sirens. Oh, we used to hear about noise pollution. Well, noise pollution is still a thing, even though we don't talk about it. And that part's tough. But then there are other parts of New York for somebody like me because I like stimulation, I like possibility, I love bright, twinkly lights. Some psychic once said, "Oh, you like New York City because you came from the stars. You like all the twinkly lights." And I do. But yeah, sometimes you just have to get up and do things. I remember that morning that I left Kansas City and I was playing a CD that takes us back at Carnegie Hall, singing New York, New York. And I just wanted to put that energy into my head. And I remember arriving and I had rented a fourth floor walk up and I had a couple of really heavy bags. And somehow I had shared a taxi with this young man, and he still needed to get to his place. But when we arrived, he asked if I wanted him to carry one of my suitcases up. And I remember thinking then, okay, this is the cool part about 50. You can say, yeah, would you please? And not feel like, oh, he thinks I'm ancient, or not feeling like, oh, does he want to seduce me? It's like, no, he just wants to carry my bag. I'm liking this.
Yeah, it's interesting kind of even what you say about the noise pollution, because one thing I've been really aware of, maybe just over the past few months, but is how affected I am by noise. People on the train, like listening or talking on their phone via speaker, the sounds of sirens, people speaking loudly. I feel like I wear these a lot. It's as if I just need to protect myself from all the sound. And it's interesting how that really has effect on you psychologically. It's almost little bit of torture. I remember even going to my doctor's office this week for a follow-up appointment, and they were jackhammering in the
Oh,
parking garage. And I was literally shaking. I even told my partner, I was like, I felt like I was going to get sick. And then I had a migraine later that day. So it's
oh.
just like, these are things that, yes, I've probably always been be shaken by a jackhammer, like within feet from me. But, it's like hypersensitive, and I'm just like,
Mm.
"Is that?" I was like, "I need to Google, is that a phase of all of this?"
Well, I'm so excited that you brought that up because this is something I love talking about because in the book, as I said, it's about yoga philosophy and Ayurvedic healing. And what you have just described, Kimberly, is something that happens as we get into our 50s, and it gets more and more so as life goes on. And that is that everybody becomes more vata. So, for people who know something about Ayurveda, there are the three doshas, Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. And Vata people, and I would imagine that you're a Vata person just in
Totally.
your regular makeup, as am
Yes.
I, predominantly Vata. But Vata people tend to be more sensitive. We're happy-go-lucky and lovely and light up a room, but we can also be frightened and anxious if we're out of balance. So whatever your particular body type, if you're Pitta, you tend to be more strong and muscular, great executive functioning, get things done. If you're Kapha, you're kind, you're generous, you almost never get sick, you're a little bit maybe rounder in the body, and you're just perfect and everybody loves you. So as you get older, whatever your dosha type is, that's with you forever. And we all have all three doshas just in varying degrees. And whatever percentage of each one you got is absolutely perfect, which is such a lovely idea because we're always told, oh, you should do this and you should be that. No, in terms of who you are dosha wise, perfect. Your job is just to stay the way you were imprinted at conception with whatever amounts of vata, pitta, and kapha you are. But in childhood, we're all more kapha. So we all get more colds and respiratory stuff and ear infections, and we've all got baby fat. And this is all kapha stuff. And then or the kind of up until menopause, andropause, and beyond, we're just so pitta. It's like, let's get out there, let's get the degree and let's get the job, and then let's get another degree so we can get a better job. And then let's find the partner and buy the house and have the kids and take care of the aging parents. And that takes all that kind of executive functioning. So we get to Vata. All that to say, when you talk about the jackhammer being louder now than it was 10 years ago, I don't think they've changed the decibels on the jackhammer. But as we get older and as more of that Vata energy creeps in, we're simply more sensitive. So, what do we do? So we balance our vata, and there are all kinds of lovely ways to do that. One is simply to have a daily routine. to just be really, really steady with the routine. Another thing is to protect ourselves. Like you talked about having your headset with you. I bring earplugs everywhere because you just never know. And living in New York, I I have to get them out pretty often. And warmth. That's another thing. Vata tends to get cold. I always wondered, why do all the old people move to Florida? I mean, it's humid down there. I mean, it's a lovely place to visit. I wouldn't particularly want to live there. Well, now I understand. Florida, Arizona, they're both hot. One's wet, one's dry, but they're both going to warm up that cold vata. So these are the things that if we know about vata and what it does and how to keep it pacified, then we can slow down so many of the things that we think of as signs of aging.
Good to who knew? Yes, I'm super Vata. And so I'm like, oh, I'm becoming more Vata. So interesting. I wondered, I was like, there must be some reason around this. So thank you for clarifying. And yes, always cold. As you saw, I just kind of wrapped myself more. Like and even when it's 95 degrees, I always have a sweater or a wrap in my bag because I know I'm going to get chilly if I'm out and about and go into like a restaurant or a cafe or a bookstore. And then I'm miserable. I almost can't function. It's
Mhm.
very
Well,
sensitive.
and that's why things like ginger tea or a lovely chai latte with almond milk, because almonds are very healing for vata. All the wonderful warm spices, nice soupy kinds of foods like oatmeal that's not the real hard kind that you could eat with a fork, but like with soupier kind of oatmeal with some lovely fruit and some cinnamon and clove and allspice and cardamom. It's almost like if you live your life kind of like a Christmas cookie. It's how I think of vata. Blankets are very vata. Beautiful, soothing music, being with your companion animal and just rubbing that lovely fur. One of the suggestions in Ayurveda, and there are hundreds, and I think one of the things we always have to watch out for in the entire self-care movement is not putting so much self-care stuff on people that it adds to their stress. So it's all pick and choose. And you do some things some days and some things other days. But one of the suggestions that I think is so lovely is that when your eyes open in the morning, the very first thing you do is give every one of your five senses something beautiful. So you might want to open your eyes and look at the sunrise. You might want to have just a little bite of dark chocolate. This is something that my first yoga teacher, 99, still practicing yoga, and still climbing up 4 flights of stairs to get to her flat in Covent Garden, does every morning. You give your ears maybe a beautiful little 5-minute affirmation tape or something like that. And you give your sense of touch, that wonderful fur of your companion animal, just that connection with this beautiful, pure soul. So these kinds of ideas, there's so much in the health world that may be very helpful, but that's kind of harsh. And I've come through all this health stuff for many, many years, and I've done water fasting, and that's really tough. That's really hard. That's really difficult for Vata. Juice fasting is a little easier, but it's not exactly comforting. And so when you come to Ayurveda, most of the suggestions make you feel good while you're doing them. And that alone is healing. Just to kind of feel like in all of your activities, whatever you're doing, whether you're out walking, whether you're doing your yoga postures, whether you're making your food, that on a kind of metaphorical level, they're all wrapping you in a blanket on a rainy afternoon. It's comfort and self love. And you've got to have that to go forward because it does not get any easier. Sorry.
Yes, yes. Well, these are great tips and great reminders and very practical, which I really appreciate. And I know our listeners do too. And I'm just thinking for you also, as you think about acclimating to New York, right? And your family acclimating, the whole thing, and then your journey to 74. Um, what would you say are some things that you've really learned along the way that have been most useful for you that you're like, "I wish I'd known this about midlife," or
Yeah,
"I wish I could share this with midlife women to help them?"
sure. Well, whatever physical symptoms you have, don't let anybody blame you for them. And then later on, as we're in this and approaching exiting Earth for the next adventure, nobody knows how long we have here. And so we never at any stage of life want to do health shaming or blaming. Certainly, if there's some kind of habit we could change and that would help our health, well, yeah, let's do that to the best of our ability. Let's get support for doing that. But life in a body is a very uncertain proposition. It's not going to be perfect. And I do think that as we become midlifers and beyond, we move into a vintage house. Our body becomes like a beautiful vintage home, and they can be so exquisite, but they take a lot of upkeep. So the idea that we're going to take a little more upkeep, that things are not going to be exactly the way they were, that's true. The other thing that I think we all need to recognize is that ageism is pervasive in our society, and it starts really early. The first time I noticed it in my own life was when I developed a just dreadfully painful condition called frozen shoulder. Have you heard of that?
Mhm.
And a lot of women get it. Technically, they say more people with diabetes get it, but everybody that I know who's had it doesn't have diabetes. I don't have diabetes, but I got the frozen shoulder. And I said to the orthopedist, "Why do I have this?" And he said, "You're 53." And I remember thinking, okay, you could bring in 10,000 women who are 53, and I might be the only one who had this. So that's not why I have this. But it's this idea, and it's very much in medicine. In fact, I shouldn't even say that that was the first time I noticed it, because when I was pregnant with my daughter, I was 32, and I grabbed my chart one day in the doctor's office on a prenatal visit, and it was stamped elderly prima gravida, which means you're having your first child after 30. So the whole medical system has got this thing of we're pretty much done with you, particularly if you're a woman, pretty quickly. So you've got to find people who support midlife women, who celebrate midlife women. And we've also got to overcome prejudices from the past. So in my case, my dad was bigger than life. He was a doctor and people loved him. He was very, very handsome. People mistook him for an actor called James Mason. If anybody follows vintage actors, maybe you know who that is. And it got to the point where when we were traveling, my dad would just sign the autographs because people were so convinced that that was who he was. And as a physician, my dad was very kind and very generous to extremely elderly women, little ladies who were frail and needed his help. Maybe they were 85, maybe they were 90. He would treat them for free. He would go out of his way. But midlife women, women who were no longer what he considered sexually attractive to him, but weren't yet old enough that he could think of them as his grandmother, he had no respect for them. And he never said this. He never sat me down and said, "Vicky, women between 45 and 75 are not to be dealt with." No, no, no. It was all very subtle. I could just tell the way he looked at younger women, the way he cared for very elderly women, and the way he disregarded everybody in between. So if you've got something like that in your history, in your family, if some of these ideas have sunk in from the culture, then we've just got to, we always talk in the health world about do a cleanse, do a cleanse. Well, let's do a cleanse on our thinking and get over this. Because the fact is, if a doctor or anybody else says, implies that there's something wrong with you because you're 53, well, what are they going to say when you're 73? So we've got to learn to stand our own ground and to own ourselves and to be proud of ourselves at every phase of life. One thing that's great about social media and the internet, and there's a lot about it that's just absolutely wretched and abominable, but something that's good is that it has given a democratic playing field for people to put themselves out into the world. So there are a lot of midlife and later life bloggers and YouTubers and people who are there on video. So we get to see women who look like us instead of women who look like models who are 17. I remember it's probably 20 years ago, so we were still in the magazine era, and my husband and I were walking, and we walked past a newsstand, and all like glossy magazines were there. And he said, is that the same woman on every cover? Because the models look so alike, you could, on cursory glance, think it was all one woman. Well, we're not there anymore. So that's something that is better. And I think it's just so important that we learn to own ourselves and not apologize for the fact that we've been here a while. The fact that we've been here a while means that we know what's up. And if anything, we have more value than ever.
I think that's so important and really owning that. And because, a lot of times people will talk about feeling invisible in midlife. And
Mhm.
I don't feel like I've noticed that as much, but I know it's a very big concern that comes up for people. And I I think it's interesting the story about your father and how it's like, oh, he didn't really like want to treat them or deal with them or didn't really see them the same way, right? Of like, oh, sweet thing, let me support you and help you, or like, oh, you're coming into your own. And so I'm just curious for you how you've navigated that in this world, right? Because it's not easy, I think, for people in a society, though it's very much like anti-aging versus pro-aging and celebrating and supporting the evolution of women. That's why I love seeing influencers that are in their 50s, 60s, 70s that are like gorgeous and really rocking it and really rocking their age and their natural beauty.
Yeah, it's so important. And I think even with that, we need to own it for ourselves because it's so interesting to look at outliers and think, well, we should be that. I could look at Albert Einstein and say, oh my gosh, I'm mathematically illiterate. Well, there's a range, and we got Einstein over here, and we got me over here. But we're all in the range. And that's the way it is for attractiveness and attractiveness as our society judges it. I mean, the most beautiful woman in my life that I have ever seen, witnessed, or known was my nanny when I was a kid. So she was 54 when she came into my life. I was 6 months of age. So I always just called her my grandmother because it seemed weird in Kansas City way back then to say you had a nanny. That was like saying you had money or something. So she was my adopted grandmother, and she was English. And this was in the time before we knew that people should stay out of the sun or wear sunscreen if they wanted to avoid wrinkles later in life. So her beautiful, soft English skin was very wrinkled, and her jaw hung down, and her arms had a lot of the triceps skin hanging there. But to me, she made any movie star just pale. Well, why? Because she loved me so much. She had time for me. She answered my questions. I found her absolutely fascinating. She knew so many things. She knew about spirituality. She knew about life. She raised me on all kinds of fabulous notions such as reincarnation, which I would have had to have waited to grow up and find yoga to get. But instead, I got it from her when I was little tiny. So beauty is definitely in the eye of the beholder. And we need to see ourselves as those who love us, see us, and not as society sees us. Now, I must say, society is getting better. We've got more of the diversity in body types and all that kind of thing. than we did certainly when I was young and everybody had to look one certain way or there was something wrong with you. But I think still, when we look at ourselves, we're somehow trained to default to, oh, this is what's wrong. And then here comes the list. And my husband, bless his heart, being a man, men don't see things. So I can say to him, could you get a can of red beans out of the pantry? And he'll just look at that thing and he'll look and he'll look and he'll say, I don't think there are any beans. And I'll go in there and they're right in the center. They're right in front of him, but they see differently. And so if I'm going on and on about, oh, this is wrong with me, that's wrong with me, he's like, I don't see it. And I try not to think he also can't see the beans. Instead, I try to tell myself, look, he can't even see it. So why should I obsess over it? And the other thing that happens in midlife too, Kimberly, I'm sure you've found this too, is that even though when we were younger, we wanted to be kind and good and helpful and philanthropic and all that, you come into this time when you really start to get it that we are connected. That's why girlfriends is so important in midlife. I think every birthday from 45 on, we need to be surrounded by our favorite friends or favorite local friends who are also somewhere in the general vicinity of our age. Because if you look around a table at these women that you have chosen to be part of your life, they are all gonna be so beautiful. You may have had this experience too. It's like, "Wait a minute, I didn't choose friends because they all used to be in pageants. Why do they look so pretty?" It's because their souls are so pretty, and we see that in them, and we need to train ourselves to see it in us.
Yes, that's such a good reminder. Well, and as you think ahead, Victoria, because one of the things like people start thinking about retirement in midlife, and I'm like, Victoria's not retiring. I don't plan to retire. And so, how have you kind of thought about like my legacy or this third act as to what you want to see and do for yourself?
Yeah. Well, I actually wish I had thought more about retirement because I think my life would be easier now if I had planned better. I remember before I left Kansas City, and I mentioned something about retirement savings or something like that. And this woman said, old writers don't retire, they just die. And I took that like it was on stone tablets. Like, well, of course, old writers don't retire, they just die. But what nobody told me was there was going to be this revolution, this digital revolution that was going to totally change publishing. So I used to make a good living just writing books. And maybe Scott Turow and people like that still do. Regular B-list, mid-list authors like me can't do that anymore. So we have to diversify and we have to have all these other things going on and we're juggling all these balls. In all honesty, and I would probably not say this on anybody else's podcast because we do podcasts, we want to make ourselves look good, but because you're you and I love you, so I'm going to love your readers, your listeners, I'm sure if I met some of them. I'm going to tell the absolute honest truth. It's hard to work when you're old if you're not just doing it voluntarily. And so I think it's really important to plan for something like retirement, even if you don't want to retire in the conventional way. And things happen that are unexpected. My husband was in a serious accident in 2020, and then he had a surgery unrelated to the accident in 2022 that has left him very much homebound. It's hard for him to do a whole lot of walking. He doesn't go downstairs to get in the subway and that kind of thing. And then, bless his heart, he had 2 strokes. And this was not in the plan. I mean, good heavens, he's 2 years younger than me. Was that kind of insurance? But we just don't know. So that was him, but it could have been me. Things happen. And so you can't plan for everything. I used to know an elderly gentleman, years ago, he used to do deliveries for the magazine that I worked for in Kansas City, James, bless his heart. And he had so much insurance that he spent all his money. I mean, every kind of insurance you could think of for everything possible in life. James had this insurance. But I think to be a little bit like James, maybe not quite that much, is really smart because anything you can prepare for, that's good. Anything you can do to kind of ease the burden going forward. And I think for people of your generation, it's easier because in my generation, we believed that there was going to be nuclear war any day. So why prepare for the future because there won't be one? And I think a great deal of that whole 1960s thing with the hippies and the carpe diem and all that was because we were a generation that really believed we wouldn't see 50. And so it kind of changed a lot of people. But I think for people who are 50 now and still have time to make all kinds of wonderful decisions, you just need to do the practical stuff. You need the will, you need the living will, you need the IRA, and you need it today. And if you don't have it today, fine. But if you got it 10 years ago, that was better. If you got it 20 years ago, that was even better. Compound interest is a gift from God. And to be able to use that and make your life easier when you're older is a very, very wise thing. So it's this great gift that we have to maybe pretend we have, even if we don't have it naturally. And that is to be able to make a balance between what's important today and what's important later. And start that as soon as you can.
It's such a great reminder. It's so important. Yes. Ideally 20 years ago, but if not today, today, start
Today's a
today.
great
Today's a
day.
great day.
Yeah.
Well, and my last question for you, Victoria, of course, is the name of the podcast is Tranquility du Jour. And so I'm wondering where you're finding and how you're finding tranquility in your everyday. I know before we started recording, you were like, I just came from a Pilates class. And so you're very active, you're always doing new things. So, how do you keep that balance between the doing and the being?
Mm. I think for me, there are a couple of things. This what we talked about earlier about the pacifying vata dosha, that's huge for tranquility because the biggest pacifier of vata dosha is tranquility. So quiet, nice music, meditation, being with a companion animal, being with a loved one. This is just so lovely. And and I need it every day. See, I used to think, well, I need that every once in a while. Every couple of months or every season, maybe I'll go do a retreat or something. But I need that tranquility du jour every jour. And so I think having your home reflect back to you what you look like, how you see yourself, so that you walk through that door and, you didn't even think you were holding your shoulders up and your breath was held. But when you walk in that door, you realize it was because you're in your beautiful, tranquil space. And to have a special part of your home that's just yours, if you possibly can, that's a really, really special thing. So you walk in your front door, you feel peace. You walk into that room, you feel uber peace. So that's important. And I think also to just be willing to do practices that might help. And if they don't help, you stop. So one of the things I have been doing lately is forced smiling. And and the one that sounds like a terrible thing. Like you see somebody in their picture and it's like, oh, that's a forced smile. I'm not talking about it that way, but I'm talking about when you don't particularly have something that's so pleasant that it makes you smile, smile anyway. And studies have shown that people who smile more live longer. They don't really know the scientific reason for that, but it bears out statistically. And certainly when you smile, you're exercising these muscles and kind of helps with the wrinkle quotient. And then if it does show your crow's feet a little more, then those are happy lines, that's different. And I guess finally, in terms of tranquility, it's for me to know that there's a bigger picture. And I'm lucky that I never had to look for that. That's kind of a gift. I've always had it within me. And whatever your worldview is, if you can find a way for yourself to be in that worldview as important and vital and intrinsic, it really helps. It really helps.
Yes, and I think, I mean, you're a great example of a positive mindset. And it doesn't mean you're always positive and everything's always perfect and you're always smiling, right? But it
Oh,
does
that's
make a
right.
difference. You're like, oh yeah. But it does make a difference, right? To have that positive mindset and to smile and to be kind. Really, it has a ripple effect for others, but also internally. So thank you so much, Victoria, for being such a great example and for being back on the show. It's a treat to have you.
Well, always a pleasure, Kimberly, and to see your book, your blogs, your work, your travels in Paris, your ballet, just such a joy.
Thank you.